So the main purpose of this paper is to underline the differences between Sri Aurobindo's philosophy, Kabbalah, and the cosmic movement. Differences which have been overlooked by historians of Western esotericism. This paper has been growing out of the historical analysis made by Peter in his article, The Kabbalah, the Philosophy Cosmique, and the Integral Yoga, a study in cross-cultural influence. In this paper, he examines whether Aurobindo was influenced by the Philosophy Cosmique and more remotely by Kabbalah as a result of his collaboration with Mir Al-Fasa. On the basis of the similarities he discovers between Kabbalah, the Philosophy Cosmique, and Aurobindo's Integral Yoga, he argues that Kabbalistic ideas had indirect influence on the Philosophy Cosmique and that the mother has passed some of the ideas to Aurobindo. However, he emphasizes that the influence of the idea transmitted to Aurobindo through the mother are relatively unimportant compared to the enormous influence of the Vedantic tradition on him. In his view, one of the interesting points which the comparison draws attention to is what might be called the multinational side of the transmission of esoteric knowledge. Hence, I will attempt to explain the resemblance between Aurobindo's thought and the Philosophy Cosmique from the perspective of Aurobindo's philosophy of history, through which he analyzes modern society and explores the growth of a multinational world into a global civilization. Through this exploration, I wish to emphasize the differences between Aurobindo's philosophy and the Philosophy Cosmique, which indeed respond to the same challenge, the loss of the markers of certainty that characterize the modern age. As Peter just said, in March 1914, Mir Al-Fasa and her husband Paul Richard traveled to India and met Aurobindo. 4 months later, they began to publish together the philosophical journal called the Arya. In February 1915, the Richard was obligated to return to France because of the First World War. After spending the war years in France and Japan, Mira and Paul Richard returned to India in 1920. Mira remained with Aurobindo in Pondicherry and became his disciple, while Paul continued to France. Between 1915 and 1920, Aurobindo published the Arya on his own and wrote monthly installments on various subjects: metaphysics, yoga, history, political science, cultural studies. I'm focusing on two texts. In the text, The Ideal of Human Unity, which Aurobindo published between September 1915 and July 1918, and The Human Cycle, which he published between August 1916 and July 1918. Then it was published under the title The Psychology of Social Development. Aurobindo introduces his philosophy of history and analyzes modern society. Through this text, Aurobindo attempts to construct the foundation for Indian modernity. He opened the text, The Ideal of Human Unity, with a critique of modern social thought. According to him, nothing is more obscure to humanity than its own communal and collective life. Sociology does not help us, for it only gives us the general story of the past and the external condition under which communities have survived. History teaches us nothing. It is a confused torrent of events and personality, or a kaleidoscope of changing institutions. Our whole thought and action with regard to our collective life is shallow and empirical. It does not seek for, it does not base itself on a firm, profound, and complete knowledge. Furthermore, he warns that the shallowness of modern social thought endangers individual freedom, since it endorses the emergence of a mechanical social order. On the basis of his analysis of the modern nation state, Aurobindo predicts the emergence of a world state, in which the strongest nation of the world will use their powers and technologies in order to bring in a superficial global uniformity. However, Aurobindo believes that through fundamental transformation of social thought, it is possible to develop an alternate vision of a free and natural world unity. Hence, he attempts to redefine the concepts of history and sociology. In the text The Human Cycle, Aurobindo discusses a theory of history presented by his contemporary German historian Karl Gotthard Lamprecht, who attempts to explain the historical changes and transition from one age to another through an analysis of the psychological forces that were active in each era. Aurobindo acknowledges that such an attempt to divide history into specific periods with definite feature is superficial and likely to err by rigidity and to substitute a mental straight line for the coils and zigzags of nature. However, he considers such a formal analysis to be necessary in order to understand the natural law of social evolution. And therefore, he borrows from Lamprecht's theory the titles of each age and endeavors to investigate on his own the dynamic of each era. The first age in the scheme Aurobindo borrows from Lamprecht is called the Symbolic Age. This era signifies the initial stage in the historical development of the Indian civilization, and it was dominated by a religious and symbolic mentality. According to Aurobindo, the Vedic text express through symbolic and poetic language something which man feels to be present behind himself and his life and his activities. The divine, the gods, the vast and deep unnameable, a hidden, living and mysterious nature of things. All his religious and social institutions, all the moments and phases of his life are to him symbols in which he seeks to express what he knows or guesses of the mystic influences that are behind his life and shape and govern or at least intervene in its movements. Yet, over time, the poetic language and religious symbols gradually cease to dominate the human consciousness, and a new stage called the typal and the conventional age emerges. At the beginning of this era, the religious and ethical social order reflects the primeval mystic influences. But after a while, with the physical growth of the civilization, the economic and social factor which support the ethical and religious order become more important than the ethical ideals. As a result, a rigid system of hierarchies is being erected in which human thought are subjected to infallible authorities and fixed system of education. In his discussion on the symbolic age, Aurobindo conveys his critique of modern scholarship through poetic language. For the modern consciousness, he claims, poetry is a revel of intellect and fancy, imagination a plaything and caterer for our amusement, our entertainer, the nashkel of the mind. Hence, modern historiography and sociology overlook the initial symbolic age that stands at the root of historical development, in which the poet was a seer, a revealer of hidden truths. Imagination, no dancing courtesan, but a priestess in God's house, commissioned not to spin fictions, but to image difficult and hidden truths. In the analysis of the typal and conventional age that follows the symbolic age, Aurobindo does not delve into detailed analysis, since this age represents for him a long period of stagnation, from which the modern era, which he calls the age of individualism and reason, emerges. At this era, individuals began to revolt against dogmatism through rational investigation, in order to discover the original truth which has been overlaid and distorted during the conventional age. However, since this age characterized by a fundamental tension between reason and individualism, their purpose cannot be accomplished. According to Aurobindo, the tension between reason and individualism is reflected in the idea of the modern nation-state. In his view, the endeavor to discover the truths of life by scientific means is necessarily individualistic. It demands the disproving of accepted popular dogmas and the replacement of hierarchical social order with liberal regime that secures freedom of thought for its citizens. But a liberal state, which bases itself on rational and universal laws, can bring in only superficial uniformity between human beings. Thus, Aurobindo argues, it seems to lead logically to the suppression of that very individual freedom which made the discovery and the attempt at all possible. Nevertheless, Aurobindo emphasizes that behind the idea of the nation-state, there is a hidden collective subjectivity, a soul nation, which represents the real self of the national group. In his view, the discovery of the soul nation signifies the emergence of a new age called the subjective age. Aurobindo connects the subjective age with a transformation of social thought that will bring in a more profound idea of the nation as an alternative for egotistic nationalism. He believed that his theory of history could serve as a theoretical framework for the creation of subjective Indian identity on the basis of Indian schools of thought. Hence, in order to comprehend the alternative vision of the nation which he presents, it is necessary to distinguish it from the European genealogy of the term on the one hand, and to discuss its relevance to the modern age on the other. The philosophical comparison between Aurobindo thought, Kabbalah, and the cosmic movement can serve as a starting point for this kind of discussion. In his book, Crossing Horizon, Shlomo Biderman is a professor of philosophy, eminent scholar of Indian thought and comparative philosophy, former dean of the Faculty of Humanities of Tel Aviv University, and today is the head of the academic college Tel Aviv Yafo. So Biderman argues that the precedence of the transcendent over the immanent, which is missing from the foundation of Indian knowledge, is the main feature that distinguishes between the Western and the Indian perspectives. Through comparative analysis between Judeo-Christian tradition, European philosophy, and Indian thought, Biderman demonstrates the distinctness of Indian philosophy from the Western civilization's conceptual scheme, which the presupposition of the transcendence lays at its foundation. In his exploration, Biderman attempts to show that modern Western thought fails in its endeavor to constitute an immanent subjectivity. Hence, he implicitly underlies the importance of Aurobindo's project of integration between the Western and the Indian perspectives. However, for the purpose of this paper, I will pick only one example from Biderman's work, through which I will illustrate the differences between Aurobindo's philosophy and the philosophy cosmique. Biderman demonstrates the precedence of the transcendent over the immanent in the Jewish tradition by drawing on Gershom Scholem's work, General Characteristics of Jewish Mysticism. According to Scholem, I'm quoting, mysticism is a definite stage in the historical development of religion, and it makes its appearance under certain well-defined conditions. It is connected with and inseparable from a certain stage of the religious consciousness. Hence, in order to characterize Jewish mysticism, Scholem portrays the major stages in the historical development of religion. The first stage, he argues, represents the world as being full of gods, whom man encounters at every step and whose presence can be experienced without recourse to ecstatic meditation. Then, this primitive stage is followed by a creative epoch, in which religion's supreme function is to destroy the dream harmony of man, universe, and God, to isolate man from the other elements of the dream stage of his mythical and primitive consciousness. For in its classical form, religion signifies the creation of a vast abyss conceived as absolute between God, the infinite, the transcendental being, and man, the finite creature. According to Scholem, only after the breakthrough occurs and religion gets its classical form, we witness the phenomenon called mysticism. But even in that stage, we might call the romantic period of religion, I'm quoting, mysticism does not deny or overlook the abyss. On the contrary, it begins by realizing its existence, but from there it proceeds to a quest for the secret that will close it in, the hidden path that will span it. According to Scholem and Biderman, the creation of a vast abyss between God and man is a necessary condition for the emergence of monotheistic religion. In their view, Jewish mysticism does not deny the abyss between God and man, and its main purpose is to rectify the abyss by experiencing God as immanence. In Aurobindo's descriptions of the Symbolic Age, on the contrary, there is no abyss between man and the gods, and he argues that the Vedic rituals of sacrifice symbolize the mystic influences that shape and govern the life of human beings. In his view, civilization emerges out of mysticism, and the telos of historical development is the rediscovery of the primeval mystic influences, which enable the experience of unity between the human and the divine. By taking this distinction into account, I believe it is possible to underline the differences and the similarities between the Philosophie Cosmique and Aurobindo's philosophy. The major difference between Aurobindo's thought and the Philosophie Cosmique derives from the sources they rely upon. The cosmic movements attempt to endorse a vision of immanent subjectivity by drawing on sources such as Neoplatonic mysticism, Christian Gnosticism, and Kabbalah. These sources can be defined as counter-traditions, but as such they are part of the Western thought genealogy. Hence, they share with it the presupposition of the transcendence. Aurobindo, on the contrary, articulates his philosophy of the self on the basis of Indian schools of thought, which do not share this presupposition. Nevertheless, the cosmic movement and Aurobindo converge in their attempt to face the same challenge, the loss of the markers of certainty, and the deconstruction of the self in post-Kantian Western philosophy. In addition, Aurobindo endeavor to constitute a national Indian identity through integration between Advaita Vedanta, Yoga and Tantra, and modern European philosophy, resembles the attempt of Gershom Scholem, who dedicated his academic career to exploration of the Kabbalah. Hence, a comparison between their works that will not ignore the differences between the Jewish and the Indian sources could contribute for contemporary discussion on the idea of the nation. Such an attempt will support the construction of a broader conception of nationalism, which is highly needed nowadays. Thank you.